Well, thanks again for joining me, Spring Lake Village, as we wrap up our four-part series on the history of Armenia. In our last lecture, we examined the darkest chapter in the history of the Armenian people, the infamous Armenian genocide of 1915, which was the first great genocide of the 20th century, a genocide that would inspire the Jewish genocide of the 1930s and 1940s, the Shoah, and decades later, the Cambodian genocide of the mid 1970s at the hands of Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. This week, we're going to examine what took place following World War I and throughout the 20th century and up until our present time. And we're going to focus in particular on the conflict in the contested region, a region wedged between Azerbaijan and Armenia called Nagorno-Karabakh. So let's begin with our lecture series, the Nagorno-Karabakh Movement and Conflict and Independent Armenia. So you might recall that once World War I broke out in July of 1914, the Ottomans would align themselves with Germany and Austro-Hungary, the so-called Central Powers, and the Young Turks, that radical group of nationalistic Turks who envisioned a pan-Turkic territory that stretched from Anatolia all the way to the Caspian Sea, viewed the Armenian Orthodox as pawns of the great powers, in particular Russia, the Russian Empire, the largest Orthodox country in the world, a perfect ally of the Armenians, as well as Great Britain and France. So you'll recall the Armenian genocide would begin in April, late April of 1914, a day in which thousands of Armenian intellectuals, especially in the universities, were rounded up. Many were murdered on the spot. And then they, as well as other Armenians, especially the upper classes, were deported. And this then began the Great Armenian Genocide. Again, difficult to determine how many actually died, but figures put it as high as 1.5 million. Horrific images I showed you of the young and the old in particular being led across the Syrian desert to their death. Many couldn't survive the grueling journey, the scorching heat, the deprivations of being forced to march across the desert. Many of the Armenians would flee to the United States or to other parts of Europe and reestablish themselves as part of the greater Armenian diaspora, and they would flourish. But the 24th of April is the darkest day in Armenian history, in which Armenians, not only in Armenia proper, but the some 11 million Armenians worldwide would remember this sad, somber day. And it forms a unifying talisman, if you will, that unites the Armenians worldwide. Some black and white photos here. These are Armenians at a refugee camp. Here you see some Armenian refugees escaping by boat. So as you know, the Ottoman Empire crumbled after World War I. And with it, the CUP, or the Committee of Union and Progress, which had been established by the nationalistic Young Turks, who were prosecuted and were guilty of crimes against humanity. And a sort of early version of the Nuremberg trials was held, in which many of the principal leaders were prosecuted and held for crimes against the Armenians. Many of these young Turks who were implicated had already left Turkey, and many of them escaped to countries like Germany, where they were eventually accused of capital crimes against the Armenian population, but guilty in absentia. Now, an Armenian Revolutionary Federation was formed in order to seek out the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide. And this is somewhat foreshadows what Mossad did, and clandestine Jewish operatives would do in seeking out Nazi criminals and seeking reprisals against the notorious leaders of the Nazi regime. And so you find Armenian Revolutionary Federation operatives, a clandestine group that would travel into Central Europe and countries like Germany and Poland and execute the leaders of the Committee of Union and Progress. At the same time, we find the so-called father of the Turks, Ataturk, born Mustafa Kemal, as he's creating a new secular state of Turkey, a modern state of Turkey to replace the Ottoman regime. He wanted to distance himself, at least ostensibly, from the CUP, although in fact many of the leaders under Mustafa Kemal were in fact members of the Young Turks, but they were absorbed into his army, and many of them claimed they were no longer part of the Young Turk movement, although in fact many of them still harbored that grandiose vision of an ethnically clean Turkey that would rid itself of Armenians, Greeks, and Jews. And in fact, that's exactly what did happen during the formation of the modern state of Turkey. So as we mentioned in our last lecture, we talked about the Armenian Enlightenment, how the Armenian people were very much influenced by liberal European ideas and the ideals of the Enlightenment. And under Tsarist rule, Armenians did have more access, more interplay with European intellectuals, and they were very much influenced by calls for nationalism, not only seeking liberation from Tsarist Russia, but also liberation from the Ottoman yoke. So Armenians, not only within the Russian Empire, but within the Ottoman Empire, began to reach out to Armenians of the diaspora, especially those who were heavily influenced by liberal ideas, to forge a national identity and the call for an independent Armenia. Now, Russia, of course, being an Orthodox country, as I mentioned in the past, had a natural affiliation, natural um, alliance with the Armenian Orthodox. Uh, but the Russian Empire did want to Russify, the so-called process of Russification of its subject states. But Armenians at this time were able to enjoy a certain amount of autonomy under Russian rule. They opened up universities, institutes of learning. As I mentioned last week, the Armenian language was further developed, a more vernacular Armenian that could be understood by not only the Armenians of Armenia, but especially the Armenians of the diaspora, was created. And this is a period in which you see sort of a flowering of our Armenian literature. And also, as we mentioned, the Armenians of the diaspora had become immensely wealthy. Armenians also living in Georgia, living in Azerbaijan, had used their acumen in business to become fabulously wealthy. Following World War I, we find Armenia for a very short period of time establishing a new republic, the first republic of Armenia in 1918. And in fact, it was Woodrow Wilson who helped to realize the creation of a new republic of Armenia. It was sometimes called the Wilsonian Armenia. But in fact, it would only last 2 years when the Bolshevik army in 1920 would march into the capital of Yerevan, reasserting Russian control. But this time not Tsarist control, but Soviet control. And at this point, whatever attempts were made by the United States under Woodrow Wilson to forge the creation of an independent Republic of Armenia would not be realized. And the treaty that was established following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire was never ratified. Here's a map during the brief independence that Armenia enjoyed between 1918 and 1920 before it became a Soviet socialist republic. So here we have the new Republic of Armenia right here, the Georgian Republic here, and then sort of these disputed areas. And this gets very gnarly and complicated, but this area is contested, disputed area between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This area as well, another disputed area in the mountainous region here that you see north of Azerbaijan. And this is the line of demarcation that was established by Woodrow Wilson that would have been part of the new Republic of Armenia, the newly created Republic of Armenia. But as I mentioned, the treaty went unratified. So for over 70 years, Armenia would be under the control of the USSR. And in 1920, the new Soviet state created what was called the Trans-Caucasian Soviet Federated Socialist Republic. which was a joint federation, a joint republic consisting of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. And this would last for about 14 years until, or 16 years, I should say, until about, well, no, 14 years, because actually the USSR was created in 1922. So in 1936, this Trans-Caucasian Soviet Republic was divided up into three separate Soviet republics, of which Armenia was one. Now, the Soviets had hoped that the new Republic of Turkey, established by Ataturk, would fall under the suzerainty, would align itself with the Soviet Union. I should not under Soviet suzerainty necessarily, but establish an alliance with the USSR. And as part of this effort, the USSR tried to undermine the Armenian Republic somewhat by assuring that the region of Karabakh, or Nagorno-Karabakh, and again, I'll show you maps and we'll talk about this contested area, mainly populated by Armenians, would be ceded to the Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan. So that was the policy, the state policy of the USSR regarding this region. Now, it's interesting that during World War II, of the three Caucasian republics, Armenia was least affected, because when you look at how small the Soviet Republic of Armenia is, it in no way resembles historic Armenia with its huge landmass that included many of the natural resources for which historic Armenia was famed. So it didn't have the oil reserves and many of the natural resources that its neighbor Azerbaijan had. It wasn't an industrial powerhouse like its neighbor to the north, Soviet Georgia, though interestingly, Armenia did flourish industrially. Its industrial output doubled 3 times during the 71 years of Soviet control. During World War II, the USSR, as did many of the great empires in preceding centuries, forced Armenians to resettle, to repopulate in other areas. So, in fact, we actually find Armenians of the diaspora ending up in Nazi concentration camps. Many of the Armenians were forced to move into Central Asia and South Caucasus Soviet republics. With the death of Joseph Stalin, Armenia enjoyed more self-governance, and the persecution of the Orthodox Church began to wane. So we see within Armenia itself, and wherever Armenian populations existed in the Soviet Empire, a revitalization of the Armenian Orthodox Church. And Armenians sought ways to reestablish ties with its ancestral homeland. And this would continue especially during the Gorbachev era of the 1980s, especially under his policy of openness, known as glasnost. So let's turn now to the movement that took place in the contested territory of Nagorno, the contested territory known as Nagorno-Karabakh, which means mountainous Karabakh. And that's this region colored in, that you notice colored in, well, it's this territory right here, wedged between Azerbaijan and Armenia. This area that you see prominently colored in red. So during the 7 decades of Soviet rule, Azerbaijan was engaging in a state-run policy to try to remove the majority Armenian population from this territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. It sought Soviet Armenia, meanwhile, tried to seek out a policy in Moscow of assuring that Nagorno-Karabakh could be incorporated into the Soviet Republic of Armenia. So while the Azerbaijanis were trying to purge this region of Armenia, attacking the region periodically, engaging in pogroms against the Armenian population, the Republic of Armenia was pushing Moscow to incorporate this contested region into Armenia proper. There was quite a bit of escalation and conflict in the late 1980s. Demonstrations for and against the petition in Armenia broke out into outright ethnic violence. So many riots began to take place both in Armenia and Azerbaijan. And a new democratic movement called officially the Karabakh Committee actually crystallized in February of 1988, and an assembly of the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Region adopted a resolution that sought the transfer of Nagorno-Karabakh from Azerbaijan to Armenia. So this was a attempt to formalize the incorporation of Nagorno-Karabakh into the Armenian polity. So what happened immediately thereafter were a number of violent acts against the Armenian populations in Azerbaijan by the Azeri people. That's the name given to the indigenous population of Azerbaijan. Here you see the famous Azeri tribesmen with their very distinctive, almost conical hats. They perpetrated great acts of violence against the Armenian populations of Kirovabad, Baku in Azerbaijan, Sumgayat. These were cities in Azerbaijan that had pretty sizable Armenian populations, and there was a wholesale slaughter, massacres, if you will, of Armenians living in these cities. So what began as an essentially peaceful democratic movement be transformed into violent conflict, all-out military aggression, in particular, against the Armenian population, again, the majority population of Nagorno-Karabakh. So Azeri attacks now would take place over the next decades against the Armenian population in Nagorno-Karabakh. So the Assembly of the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Region declared this contested territory the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh. And they were able to mount an effective enough army to repulse the Azeri forces, and they were able to establish a security zone that would bring humanitarian relief in this region. I'll show you some maps in a minute to help clarify what I'm talking about. So here's one map. So this is Nagorno-Karabakh, the whole contested region, and the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh. But this is territory that was seized from Azerbaijan surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh and was now in the control of Armenia. And then this one, so these areas are areas that the Azeris, these are flashpoints, attacks in this region by the Azerbaijanis, by the Azeris. In this region, along this border, also in this region, this territory is another contested territory called Nakhichevan that was actually ceded to Azerbaijan. So this area to the south of Armenia actually is part of greater Azerbaijan. So between 2014 and 2015, the Azeris, the Azerbaijanis, continued to commit ceasefire violations against the Republic of Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. So these represent all these red kind of flash points, these little icons, and the black ones represent the violations committed by the Azeris. In 1990, the so-called New Armenian Army was created in order to protect Armenia's interests in the Nagorno-Karabakh region from Azerbaijan. And as the USSR began to implode in the late 1980s and finally collapsed in 1991, Armenia would be the first republic to declare its independence. And that took place in 1991. And the communist apparatchiks who controlled the Soviet Republic of Armenia peacefully transferred power to the new Armenian leadership of Free Armenia. And Armenia would elect its first president, Levon Ter-Petrosian, who would serve over the next 2 years as the first president of the newly independent Republic of Armenia. Here you see him in around late 1991 alongside the Clintons at an official state visit to the United States. So, as you might expect, there was great jubilation throughout the Armenian diaspora, the some 11 million Armenians living throughout the world, including the more than 1 million Armenians living in the United States. And we find a resurgence, of course, of the Armenian Orthodox Church within Armenia proper. And among the Armenians living in the diaspora, massive investment in the new independent state of Armenia. And this is also the period in which celebrated Armenian artists like the famed director Adam Agoyan wanted to remind the world at large of the great Holocaust, the first Holocaust that had taken place in the first quarter of the 20th century. And so really for the first time, with the establishment of the Republic of Armenia in 1991, now the world would know of the true history of the Armenian people. Armenia would remain very closely linked with Russia, despite the fact that the Soviet Empire no longer existed. It did. It still does remain very, very close ties with Russia. So Russia remains the most important trading partner of Armenia today. Massive commerce between the two countries, and most of Armenia's military hardware comes from the Russian state even today. This map shows the Armenian diaspora. So in dark brown, those have the largest population of Armenians. As I mentioned, there's well over 1 million living in the United States, but Russia too has more than 2 million Armenians living in Greater Russia. France has a sizable population. And then, of course, as one would expect, there's some 3 million people living in the Republic of Armenia, and Armenian populations in Azerbaijan and Georgia, etc. But this gives you an idea of the Armenian diaspora throughout the world. So the conflict in this contested region of Nagorno-Karabakh, wedged between present-day Armenia and Azerbaijan, is its history is not one of ancient hatreds, but in fact is really has a more modern, has a history that actually dates back to the 1920s. In particular, the decision in 1921 to incorporate the region into Soviet Azerbaijan rather than Soviet Armenia. This was pivotal, although one does have to point to certain former historical realities that did sort of shape the present day conflict that does exist, especially the demographic balance of the Caucasus that especially shifted during the Ottoman period and when Armenia was controlled by Imperial Russia or Tsarist Russia. Again, these movements of Armenians, the shifting movement, the forced resettlement of Armenians does play a role in the present day ongoing conflict of this region. But as you know, in 2020, conflict did erupt once again in Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan, very much supported by Erdogan's Turkey, and the so-called Republic of Artsakh. This is the new name that has been given by Armenia to this region. And Artsakh, you might remember in our very first lecture, is one of the ancient names of Armenia. So it's hearkening back to this legendary past, but now they want to call this region the Republic of Artsakh. So in September, specifically the 24th of September of last year, conflict re-erupted in this region. And Turkey's involvement is very telling, because under the regime of Erdogan, his grandiose vision of once again reestablishing the glory days of the Ottoman Empire, the Young Turks' vision of a pan-Turkic realm that would stretch from the Eastern Mediterranean all the way to the Caspian Sea. So Turkey sees itself as a major player in this conflict, and it's important to see that in its perfidy in other parts of the Middle East as part of this attempt to revitalize the pan-Turkic dream, extending its sphere of influence both by bolstering Azerbaijan's standing in this ongoing conflict in this region of Nagorno-Karabakh and its struggle with Armenia, and also to try to limit Russia's sphere of influence in this region. So the most recent armed conflict began when Azeris attempted to reclaim the less mountainous territory of this region in southern Nagorno-Karabakh. This was an easier region to try to take control of. So in 2020, the Azerbaijanis used high-tech deployment of drones, long-range heavy artillery and military strikes, and then used massive state propaganda, dropping leaflets from the air in order to foment warfare and violence, and to sort of undermine the will of the Armenian people in this region. So Russia, France, and the United States tried 3 times to broker a ceasefire, and it failed throughout the month of October and into early November. But on the 10th of November, just a week following our presidential elections, a ceasefire was brokered by Vladimir Putin, as well as the president of Azerbaijan and the prime minister of Armenia were able to negotiate a ceasefire. And there currently is a peacekeeping force consisting of over 2,000 Russian soldiers in order to keep the peace. Now, under this agreement that was negotiated, the warring sides would keep control of the areas they currently hold within the contested area of Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia would return the surrounding territories that it had occupied in 1994. They would revert back to Azerbaijan. Let me show you a few maps now for a better understanding of the shifting of, of, of territory in this contested region. So this is a very recent map that shows you how things stand as of now, following this most recent conflict and the peace accord the tentative peace that now exists between Armenia and Azerbaijan over this contested area. So you can see the Republic of Armenia. This is the region of Nagorno-Karabakh under Armenian control. This purple area is territory that was regained by Azerbaijan. So this is the territory that they were able to take control of during this most recent engagement that took place over the course of 40 days from September 20th to November 10th. This is the border of Nagorno-Karabakh according to the 1991 Declaration of Independence. This is a corridor between these two territories. This is the territory here. This is the important territory that Armenia agreed to revert back to Azerbaijan, that they had been in control of from 1994. So this area in green, as well as this area in green. So that is just a sort of a cursory overview of the ongoing conflict. Very gnarly, as I said, hotly disputed even now. And I'm sure over the course of the next couple of years, we'll probably be hearing of flare-ups once again in this contested region between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So that wraps up my four-part series on Armenia. I hope it was instructive, at times entertaining. As I mentioned from the start, it's remarkable the role Armenia has played over many centuries as a pawn of the great empires, something that took place 3.5 millennia ago and would continue over subsequent centuries, even into our own time. We've seen how the history of Armenia is one of a struggle of survival of the Armenian people, their tenacity in holding on to time-honored traditions, their national identity, their Orthodox religion. But through it all, they survived. They flourished as great entrepreneurs, as people who would contribute much in the area of art and architecture, as famed architects, as we discovered, as great writers. They developed, of course, their own language, and still today, 11 million strong, the Armenian people still thrive and prosper. So next week, we're going to begin actually a 2-month lecture series. In the years that I've been fortunate to teach at Spring Lake, I've normally not had an extended lecture series, but I thought the next topic most certainly deserves a protracted lecture series. And beginning in March, we're going to explore the Greek War of Independence. And March um, marks the bicentennial of the Greek War of Independence, which commenced in late March of 1821. So, a very important year for the Greek people and the Greeks of the diaspora. Of course, I share in that celebration, as you might expect, but it is a very remarkable history of how Greece would become the first of the many nations under the rule of the Ottomans to break away. Uh, it's a very colorful history of many protagonists. So we'll examine some of the many colorful adventures that would play a part in Greece's War of Independence, and how the great powers of Britain and France, as well as the United States, played a decisive role in the eventual liberation of Greece from the Turkish yoke. And I think it'll be once informative, as well as instructive, entertaining, and I hope very much that you enjoy this 8-part lecture series that will begin next Friday, the 5th of March. So look forward to seeing you then. Have a great week. Enjoy the weather, and look forward to seeing you when we begin our new lecture series on the Greek War of Independence. So bye for now.